Thanks, Scott. Thanks for the introduction. And good morning to everyone. I've been on the road for about 10 days now. This is the last show. Much like Kanye and Jay-Z, I'm just going to do the same song 8 times in a row and then walk out the door. No, hopefully I got something a little new to present today. It's a little bittersweet to be here because when Scott held up the copy of the book, that was written by Chad, and Chad is really my partner in crime at Float. Super smart guy, and Chad was unfortunately in a car accident about a week ago. He got hit by another driver, and he had surgery on his leg. But he was such a trooper. He was like, "I'm going to come. I'm going to definitely be here." And we're going, you don't have to come. You might be a little under the weather. And we've been getting this sort of steady stream of content from him along the way. And it's been wonderful to have him here virtually, but I definitely miss having him here in person. And I know that Scott mentioned the book, and I just want to plug it again because it's a very interesting description of what's going on in the mobile landscape right now. It provides a different perspective. It's a perspective of someone who builds applications and someone who understands the academic underpinnings and the theory of building and deploying those applications as well. And he's my friend, so I really got to pitch for him along the way. So as Scott mentioned, I work for Float. I work in the UX area, and I also have a life as an academic, as he mentioned. I've been teaching the entire time that I've been working commercially as well. So I've sort of had these two worlds that I've lived in, and I hop back and forth for whoever's paying the best at that moment in time. So it just, it really depends on where my interests lie, to be completely honest. Like I tend to move in the places that are compelling for me. In the last 3 years, mobile has really been something that's interested me. And so mobile hasn't been around forever. And as Scott mentioned, I've been doing this for about 2 decades. I really began at the Institute for Learning Sciences at Northwestern. And one of my first gigs that I ever had was moving e-learning over for a little company called Accenture, which used to be known as Anderson Consulting. And I worked on one of the original platforms for their e-learning product for their spin-off company called Indelic. So I've been working in e-learning and online training, whatever you want to call it, distance learning and classroom learning for my entire career. This is what I do. I'm like a 4th-generation teacher. We're all educators. And I always told my mom and dad I was never going to be a teacher. So like when I went back to graduate school, it was a great moment for them to gloat. But I was so happy that I did it because I was able to find that my experiences in the classroom were informing my commercial practice quite a bit. And I have to say, I actually have a love-hate relationship with distance and e-learning. Because as a teacher, I love being connected to students. I love having those one-on-one interactions. I love the informal relationships and the formal relationships that I get to forge with the people I work with on a daily basis. And so when I think about e-learning, distance learning, what we're doing with mobile learning and informal social learning, I'm always trying to find a way to capture those intangibles. I'm trying to find a way to bring as much of that one-on-one interaction, that informal experience that I get in the classroom day after day, to what I'm doing when I'm designing applications. So that's a driving force behind what I actually do. And I should log into my machine as well. Okay, so what I want to talk about is this concept of informal social learning. So I think we all get like the social platform thing, it's beat into our head. The informal part is maybe the more interesting part of the connection between the two. And that's what I was talking about in the classroom. And it really breaks down to this difference between what I think is the split between education and learning. Education, you want to look at sort of the psychological definition of the word, it's very formic, okay? It's very much based on a system. It's educational systems. You move through educational systems. And I'm an academic, and I think academia is broke. We have serious issues with what we're doing in higher education. If you look at any of the trends of what's happening right now, for example, with University X, the amount of people that are looking for education online, the way that they're leveraging their monies online as opposed to the way that they are leveraging their monies physically in the classroom, I think we have big problems with the system. And that's what makes me really excited about learning. And there's a big difference. Because you don't need a university to learn. You don't need a big formal system to learn. What you need is people that are interested in sharing information, people that are interested in helping you move through behavioral change. And that's a big part of this. And what we learn is sort of split into the 70-20-10 rule. 70% of what we learn and retain is informal. It's not something that we learn in the classroom. And how many parents do we have in the room today? Okay. And it's that axiom, you know, children don't do what we tell them to do. They model our behaviors. They model the things we exhibit. They model the way that we talk to our partners, the way that we talk to people we buy things from on a daily basis, the way that we talk to their siblings. That is how they begin to form their relationships and how they learn. So the other part of it is sort of self-selected interactions. What do we choose to engage in? What do we choose to make part of our own personal learning experience? And I was talking to some friends this morning that someone had tweeted at Tech Week this week that said, conferences are great places to work on your laptop and watch other people working on their laptops at the same time, which I thought was brilliant, because it is about self-selected learning, because I can guarantee throughout this talk, you guys will be tuning in and tuning out. And I don't take it personally because sometimes I'm just not that interesting. But we do it because there are places within our daily interactions where we want to be engaged because what the person is saying, what the person is sharing is relevant to us personally. And we move through that. And they're all sort of like temporal studies that support this. And if you want to look at like sort of mini circadian cycles about how people learn, how much information they can absorb at a particular time. There's a lot of science that actually supports this, but ultimately, it's about how we choose to engage with things. It's how we choose to come to the table and select what it is that we want to eat. So I really like this concept of creativity and modeling. And what you're looking at up here is an Arduino board. An Arduino board is a little hardware breadboard that interactive developers use to create physical interactions with devices. So they sell them online. It's sort of like the modern day Heath kit, if anyone remembers those. And inside my capstone classes, we'll develop these projects. And the students begin to learn how to program these little boards and design interactions. And I brought this Arduino board home because I was trying to do some programming on the chip, and I had it in my kitchen, and I was sort of working on it, spending some time. And about an hour later, my daughter came out, and she said, hey, it's Valentine's Day. Like, I want to make something for Valentine's Day. And she had this kit of puffs, and she started building these little owls. She's got a thing for owls, okay? And I thought it was really interesting because I knew that she wanted to do it, but she only chose to do it when she saw me partaking in that creative activity. When she knew that I was working, she wanted to be working as well. She was self-selecting, and she was modeling the same behaviors that I was exhibiting. She wasn't working on Arduino boards, but she was working on something that she really cared about. It was the setting up of that environment. And it wasn't as though I had set up an itinerary for the night and said, we're going to eat dinner, we're going to do homework, and then we're going to be creative. You know, it wasn't that at all. It was like, this is just the natural order of the informal relationship that I have with my daughter on a daily basis in the way that we work. So when we think about how we learn, one of the things that was really compelling to me in graduate school, I had a professor that worked in cognition. And she would bring up this idea of sort of personal narratives and how we construct our own memories. How do we construct our own stories? And it's constructed through these juxtapositions of emotion, time, and categorization, okay? What was I doing and how did I feel about it? What was my emotional response? Where was I at my point in life? Did I do it when I was young? Did I do it when I was old? When I was in middle school? Was I in graduate school? Was I in my first job? And then finally, what's the categorization? Did I do it at home? Did I do it at work? Did I do it for fun? And then all the subcategorizations. And we create this history in our head. And if we were to catalog all the things we did, those are probably about the 3 things we'd be able to really understand. Emotion is probably the strongest one. And Donald Norman did a lot of study in this area. And these responses that we have to specific learning events can be categorized in sort of 3 different ways. Our visceral response, like how we feel in our gut to something, which is a native response. Our behavioral response to something, which is how we've been taught to sort of respond to it. It's a little higher order of thinking. And then finally, the highest order, which is sort of our intelligent response, which is our reasoning, which usually goes against our visceral response that we have in the beginning. And the visceral is usually the correct one, which is the axiom of sort of following your gut, okay? So one of the things that I like to try to do is to figure out how we order behaviors and how we order our learning. And this is a short video of my daughter learning how to make apple crisp, okay? And she had a recipe card, but we had to sort of create mnemonic devices for her to understand. We had to sort of create temporal spacing for the ingredient. And we had to have an emotional response. You can make this for a mom, okay? For being the motivation for her to move through this process. And that was how I organized it for her. But then I began to think about the event. Like, what did I learn from it? How did I organize it? And after I finished, I sort of realized, okay, I have my own personal taxonomy about how I organize things. On the emotional side, I have just like things I do with Adeline, things that I enjoy doing with my daughter. These are pleasurable. On the other side, I have cooking, which is another passion of mine. So I sort of have 2 running taxonomies, 2 running descriptions for these types of events in my head. Now, one of them will be ordinal. It'll sort of rise to the top based upon where I am in time and space. But it's important to understand that events can be categorized in a lot of different ways, and they tend to shift over time. They're not really set, which is really cool but really challenging as an interactive designer, because data structures like to be fixed. They don't like to be soft. We're going to talk a little bit more about categorization. But one other thing that's also really important to think about with learning is the fact that within organization, archetypes are extremely important. And these are leaders within companies, schools, families, the folks that we model our behavior after. And so these are sometimes the best performers within organizations. They hold mastery, but they also are willing to share information. They are willing to give of themselves. They're willing to put out there an example of what they do in the course of their day that makes them successful. And that's really cool. So I have a picture up here of some of my students. And these are our award winners. So every year, we give out awards in specific categories. Gus is actually here. He's won our development award, and he now works with some other graduates of the program, Dave and Chris. Chromatic Sites, if you're looking for a Drupal company, they're the guys to talk to. The 3 guys back there, they're really smart, but they're not cheap. But they're good, which is more important. So these students, they're archetypes within our department. They're sort of the best of the best. And in the context of our capstone projects, people would probably come to them for advice quicker than they would come to me, more likely because they were just expecting me to reprimand them for something they should know. So they would go to their archetype leaders within their group to find the answer to something before they would come to me, because they knew there would probably be a consequence if they came as a question, if it was the 8th time they were asking, along the way. But, the peer learning is extremely important. It's an example of peer learning, which is so awesome for social learning, okay? But social learning is risky, because at times, your archetypes don't always exhibit the behaviors that you want. So I think I asked them to do this. They weren't really flipping me the bird along with that. Okay. But the good part is that within social networks, those types of bad behaviors, and that might have just been a moment of jocularity, but bad behaviors are normally suppressed by the group, okay? They are not brought to the surface over and over again, which is one of the things that I always try to explain to organizations that are scared about having a social aspect to their learning platform is that the peers within the group will moderate the content. And it's especially true within organizations because no one wants to be a jerk within their own organization, and especially to have it in print, or on, in digital form and as a record. So informal social learning is about capturing the point of moment, the point of impact. It's like when you absolutely learn that fact, having the mobile device with you and logging it. And that's why we created Tappestry. That's the whole reason for creating it. And why did we do it? Because we want to make a lot of money? No, we do want to make a lot of money, but why I worked on it is that I'm passionate about learning. I'm passionate about this idea of sharing content and sharing ideas. But the market doesn't look too shabby, and Scott talked about that quite a bit. And there are a lot of people at this Tech Week that are actually banking their businesses on the growth of mobile. So we know that there's a lot of money there, but the question is, can we create something that really has value within the marketplace? So we wanted to figure out, like, hey, can we do this? What's the conduit? And can informal and social learning exist in the same place with formal learning? We wanted to find that out. So from Tappestry to 2Ps Tappestry. And as you guys know, tapestries tell stories. They're woven to have, you have a visual history of an event that happened. It's a tapestry of the apocalypse, nice light topic for Monday morning. And tapestries were hung in public or in courts along the way to share stories with other people. They would also travel with people. That's the thing maybe you didn't know is that a lot of times courts would actually roll their tapestry up with them, and they would take it wherever they were governing at that point in time and then unroll it so people would understand their story, their coat of arms, their history, et cetera, et cetera. So we like this idea of people actually weaving their own tapestry.
Each of us learns every day. We learn primarily through unstructured learning events that we view, attend, hear, read, watch, and experience. The best part is that Tappestry was built to help you record those things that you learn. You can share what you've learned with interested people, and you can learn from others about topics that matter to you. Tappestry provides the ability to record, the ability to share, and the ability to learn from others. Here's how Tappestry works. Log into the application and connect to an existing Facebook or Twitter account. You can have your Tappestry events post to your social networks all the time, or post the threads you create on a case-by-case basis. Start by creating a thread. A thread is something that you have learned and want to share with others. Click on the Add button. Guide yourself through the process with action verbs like I read, I watched, I wrote, and whatever descriptive text you desire. I learned that the Andromeda Galaxy is over 2 million light-years away. Next, choose from a list of curated category topics to tag your posts. Or pull from your list of favorite categories. You can also attach media, hyperlinks, and link to your existing Facebook or Twitter account, if you're so inclined. Finally, you can rate your threads with 1 to 4 stars based upon how important it is to you. Your rating will determine the size of that thread in your personal tapestry. The Tappestry view can display just your threads or everyone's threads. This rich visualization allows you to see many color-coordinated threads that correspond to specific categories. You can see details behind each individual thread. Rate this event with a plus or minus and leave comments. You can find and manage connections via the Settings menu and determine who would have the ability to see your Tappestry threads. The application is available today on the iPhone. Download it and start weaving your own tapestry.
The app is a bespoke Objective-C application, so it was built from scratch. All right. By the way, how many people are in mobile in the room? Do mobile in their business? Okay. How many people are in learning? And how many people want to just sort of learn new stuff? Cool. Okay, so an even split. All right. So when people talk about a bespoke application, it's just a custom app. Like whenever a company calls us, they're like, hey, we want you to build something. you build something from scratch. It's known as like a soup, right? A bespoke application. And one of the things that's really interesting about this is this whole project was prompted by a different group's work. ADL, and Aaron is going to talk to you today over here about something called Tin Can, which is a big part, maybe a little bit. A little plug? A little plug, okay. Because this whole application came about because of what they're doing with Tin Can. How many people are familiar with SCORM as a standard? Okay, Tin Can, correct me if I'm wrong, will be the thing that will dominate SCORM. It came from Aaron's mouth, so there you go. If you want to blame someone, you can blame him. It's an evolution, all right? But it uses something known as an LRS, a learning record store. And if you guys have worked with SCORM, you know it's good in some ways. It's also very limited in other ways. And what we're able to do is to link together what's been created in Tin Can. We wrote an iOS library that allowed the native application to talk to the LRS. And then we were also able to leverage a cloud-based MongoDB for all the metadata, the stuff that wasn't stored inside of Tin Can. Because if you take a look at the specification, you'll see that there are very specific things that exist within the Tin Can structure. So one of the really interesting things about Tin Can is it uses a very specific action-verb-object construct, which is really cool. And if you saw when people were entering the learning events inside of Tappestry, there were a set of verbs that showed up, right? I read, I watched, I saw.
Things we are.
And the learning event is constructed around this idea of capturing those specific moments. So it was built upon an initial specification. There's another specification, the final 1.0, which comes out when again? Okay, so we're about 9 months away right now from the final release. And it allows people then to take that learning event text, they can categorize it. And did you see where they chose the categorization? Okay, this thing has been the best and worst part of my life. And can you imagine why? Because the first taxonomy we created had 1,000 categorizations in it. It was ridiculous. And there was the 3-tier structure where you would drill down. I built it and I couldn't find anything. Couldn't find anything. And as I use the application now, I'm still not happy with it. Like it's not there yet. So we're really thinking about the ways in which people will be able to use this categorization. Because the things that make categorization useful is sort of the personalization of it, right? So you have these, and that's what gets back to what I talked about before, right? So cooking and things that I do with my daughter, for me personally, are very important. They may not be important to you, but they're critical for me in my personal experience and my personal learning. As I'm scrolling through that other category, it becomes very difficult for me to understand where those events exist within my personal history. So this is sort of a first cut as you look at it. And as you use the application, you'll see the limitations of it. How many people have used Chatter, for example? It's a Salesforce product? Okay. Twitter, for example. So the great thing about Twitter, right, is you get to categorize the information with hashtags, all right? The bad part about Twitter, like if you imagine to use hashtags for this, think about how you would begin to try to aggregate the information. How would you begin to try? And there are a lot of services out there that do that, you know, that will do the aggregation of those tags, but you have to think about sort of signal to noise. And then when you think about like making that material searchable, how is that going to scale and grow? And the thing about Tappestry that I think is really interesting, and as you look at this, you could say, oh, this is like a really cool Twitter client. You know, I could do the same thing with that. But the thing you're not going to get with the Twitter, you know, sort of environment because of the categorization and is the sort of the personal history. And if you look at the application in Stream View, you can see this history of things that you've posted and then how people are commenting on it. And then you can also see the aggregation. So the other part of this is sort of the data visualization. If you saw, you know, the blocks as they come together, the groupings of those blocks are sort of based upon the popularity of the posts. And right now, it's based upon your personal rating. You get a rating of 1 to 4 stars. The next version of this will use a combination of how many times people are clicking on it, how many times people are commenting on it, and it will grow in size and in weight over time based upon how much is actually being trafficked and used. So I did want to talk a little bit on how do you get like from A to Z. So what you see up here is a quick wireframe of, I think it was like a second wireframe of the Tappestry view. And we use a tool called Graphle for our visualization and sort of our wireframing. And the thing that's really interesting and different is sort of the way in which you're wireframing for mobile applications. You know, you're building upon a construct that exists. Like we're patterning user behaviors that have been set by groundbreaking applications like Tap, groundbreaking applications like Facebook. If you think about geolocation, if you think about adding media to events, if this was the first time we were trying to do it, it would be very hard to train users, to train learners, but that pattern has been ingrained. I have a short clip from a colleague of mine, Francesco. Francesco teaches at the University of Messina, and he did some of the initial work on the interface, and there's about a 2-minute clip of him talking about interface design for mobile devices and specifically for Tappestry, and how you sort of build on those frameworks that are already in existence. If I can find it.
What, so?
So user experience have a huge impact on the success of a project, whether we are talking on a mobile site or a social network. And the Tappestry app is both. In designing an app, my favorite rule is designing the app flow before open Photoshop, Xcode, OmniGraffle, or any other offering software. So visualizing an entire app is a complex process, and sketching it even on a paper napkin is part of a good practice, and for sure it helps to save time later in design. So part of how I define a good user experience is having an app work just like a user would expect it to, even if it's the first time the user uses it. So to minimize the learning curve of an app, it's always good to follow mobile devices manufacturer guidelines. These are made to lower the learning curve, leveraging the time that users spend to learn how to use a simple and well-designed app, so they don't have to struggling all the time they download a new app. And at the end, less learning curve means better user experience, and a better user experience means a good impact on virtual market and more exposure and downloads. Although most of the time relying on manufacturer guidelines make an app well designed, sometimes an extra effort is required to take an app out of the crowd. This is what we try to do with the Tappestry. The main challenge in making the user interface was leveraging the space. In most of standard app, the 20% of the available screen space is taken by navigation control dislocated in the upper and bottom part of the screen. And sometimes this percentile rise up 38% with search box or filtering options. Tappestry is an app where content visibility is essential in stream, but especially in the Tappestry view. So what every single pixel, especially talking in the Tappestry view, every single pixel has a role in the interaction with the user. And in that case, only the 10% of the app view has been taken by default control. And with the opacity in the Tappestry view, the user can leverage the whole view to pinch, swipe, scroll, and browse the user-generated threads. So I hope you will enjoy your learning experience with the Tappestry.
Talking about this other deck was inside this Tappestry view. And okay, so when he's talking about that 10% being used just for navigation, it's the top bar where you can add an event. I got my timer on here. And the rest of it being used by the Tappestry visual in general. So another flaw we have in this design right now is the difference between the stream view and the Tappestry view. And if you download the application, you can pop between the two. Like, the stream view is something that's very understandable, right, from sort of the path metaphor. And I think we need some type of stream view, but not to have it be as disjointed as it is right now from the Tappestry view. The Tappestry view is really groundbreaking because it does the data aggregation. There are very few tools out there that are sort of using this. And I think that mix between the two is sort of where I want to take the design over the next 3 months. And that's really what I'm going to be working for. But for those of you that do mobile development, you can see like the sort of smoke and mirrors thing we're doing with the Tappestry. Because what we do is, you see those individual, we call them threads, because they got tweets, we got threads, okay? So you would go in and zoom in on that close-up of the thread view, and then it's sort of peeling that layer back, and it's revealing another menu layer sort of behind it. So it looks seamless, but it could be more integrated than the way it is currently. So that's something we're definitely going to need to work on over time. The other question that I get quite often is how does this exist in the landscape? You know, how does it compare against other products that are out there? So, you know, on one side you have the social networks, like the big open ones, Facebook and Twitter, which are great, but they don't really have the security that companies are going to require. They're built more for the general population, and they weren't created for learning. All the way on the right side, you have learning management systems. They tend to be heavy and IT-based, and they serve a specific need for tracking progress. So they're not really in the same space as well, but there are things that snap into that. E-learning traditionally has had more of a formal structure as opposed to the informal learning events that we talked about. You shift back over to the left, you have Jive, Yammer, and Chatter, which are about learning, obviously. They are about social networks for business, but they have their own issues. There are issues with data ownership. They're not interoperable. They're not going to be using something like Tin Can moving forward, which gives us, I think, where we exist in the space with Tappestry. It's mobile. It'll be a permanent, searchable, and organized record of informal social learning. It's built on the ADL Tin Can standard, which is also going to be used by the Department of Defense, which tends to be a big buyer of training in the world, the biggest there in the United States. And it will integrate with a lot of other great products that are out there. So when Scott was mentioning Robert's company, OnPoint, you know, their product is all-encompassing, you know, as a solution. Our product is like one very small part of a learning system. But if a vendor decided and they were using Tin Can, they could snap in Tappestry as a module if they wanted to. So the interoperability is also extremely important for us. And this is sort of our quick product roadmap. This is what we would like to do if we can keep it funded and keep it developed. This effort was all self-funded, by the way. We just decided to do it, and we dedicated the resources towards it. Altogether, I think we had probably a rotating staff of 5 that were working on it over those 8 weeks that Scott talked about. So we had an OpenGL ES programmer. We had myself working as a PM and a designer. We had Dan Pfeiffer, who's our lead developer. We had another developer working on the application, and Heather Ford working on the graphic design and sort of the look and feel. And we had a couple people rotating in and out as well. So if we were going to keep working, we'd probably need about 3 more people, you know, sort of going at that pace over the next 6 months. And we'd really like to see if we can get search put into this. It would be wonderful for people to be able to find stuff with completion from the entire corpus of content. We think the web bookmarklet would be great. You know, having something on a web page where you'd be able to like go ahead and add it to your Tappestry as you're browsing. I think that would be fantastic. A great way to capture information. Obviously, the push notifications, so when people are commenting on stuff that you've built, or you get a rating on something that you've entered, you would get a notification of that. And then finally, if we could, like if we're going to sell this to companies, if we're going to be able to bring it to market for an organization, we'd want to be able to stand up their own version of it in the cloud. We'd want to be able to skin it for them. We'd create their own customization of categories. So if you wanted to, you could organize your content along a product line, a functional area within your business, however you wanted to do it. And then obviously, everyone wants to know about the metrics. You know, they want to measure it. So that's extremely important as well. The desktop client, we keep sort of knocking back and forth as to whether we want to do that, but that's also in play right now as well. So it's been a wonderful experiment, and we'll know in the next 6 months whether it will continue to live. And I think that's been the best part about this, is that I think we're trying to build a best-of-breed product that we think encapsulates this idea of informal social learning. It's really driven by an idea and a passion, and it hasn't been driven so much by the marketability of the application, which may or may not be a good idea. But our introduction at a conference last week, and then also at Tech Week this week, I think is going to give us a better indication if it actually has legs and if people would want to use it over time. So that's my talk. And if you guys, do you have any questions about the process or, yeah, oh, yes?
Yes, my name is Sharon Richardson. I come from a sales background. So how do you plan to make
I'm sorry, which background?
a sales background?
Sales background.
Yeah, so how do you plan to make money off this?
How are we going to make money? It's a great question. That's a great question. Okay. Yeah, Scott sells these things. So, all right, so look at the models that are out right now, okay? If you look at Facebook, how do they make money? How does Facebook make money? Okay, views, et cetera, okay. So you could monetize it that way, right? People using it, ads, whatever you want to do it that way. If you look at Yammer and Jive, how do they make money? Well, they're freemium in the beginning, right? So they're not making any money. But after that, hopefully once they get in the door, they're charging $5 to $7 a pop per user per month, okay? So that's another way to work. Robert can talk to you how they make money on the other side, okay, of the e-learning, and how they're charging for training. So how are we going to make money? Well, that's what we're asking people right now. Most of the people, when they buy learning, when we're talking to them, they're wanting to buy, I think, for a fixed price, and what they're actually paying for. There are a lot of other pieces of software that will do very similar things, but people are willing to pay, from our initial research, they're willing to pay sort of fixed licensing fees over the course of the year for customization. They're willing to pay for security to protect their IP, and they're willing to pay because it's capturing all the stuff that is getting lost in the ether. They're willing to pay for that because it's capturing those moments of when people are having interactions and when they're sharing information and sort of point of need delivery. So there's value for companies to actually have that. Now, from a sales perspective, like I've talked to people that have said, we had a real estate company that brought us out, and they were like, we need something like this because I have to show the lower 90% performers what the top 10% are doing in the course of their day. How many calls are they making? What blogs are they reading? What software are they using? How are they handling objections? It's sort of having that on-demand information, so it's that archetypal behavior that they want to present to the rest of the world. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. I hope they buy it. It'd be great. Yeah.
What might enable your categorization? It strikes me that these people who work with our trying to capture secret classes. The nut is really the problem that people have their own relation database.
Exactly.
And analog to that might be mind maps, digital mind maps, hardware maps. I'm wondering what you thought about in terms of leveraging a concept like research and approach.
So what are the models that are out there right now that you've seen? Okay. So we talked a little bit about Twitter, right? Which is just wide open. And Chatter's like that, for example, right? You can go into Chatter and you can create your own group, you can create your own categorization, and it just sort of becomes flooded, right? And so it's like somewhere in between like this like canonical saying this is how you have to sort the information versus this is the mind mapping. I honestly don't have the answer. I'm not sure. I think what we're going to find is that with companies, we're probably going to see some top-down where they're going to say, we're going to see general categorizations. And like, if you're a product-based company, it may be like along product lines, for example. And then there could be like a functional area for like internal corporate functions, which would be the general categorization. I think what we're going to find is that there'd be like 10 to 12 higher level categorizations, and then underneath that, you're going to see something much more organic. So at least there's some aggregation of the data. There's got to be some major aggregation of the data that's going to help with the sorting along the way. I also think some adaptive structuring of a hashtag system would be brilliant. So I'm sort of like out searching right now for good solutions to that. And again, there's a lot of people that do that. So it's like maybe there's an API we can hook into that would help us, that would help us do that. I mean, my goal would be like let everyone do what they want, and then the algorithm sorts it out. But it's a little more problematic to actually build. So especially in 6 months along the way. Yeah. Yeah. It's what? Mm-hmm.
How do you actually make sure that you're sifting through and getting the whole bunch of information, especially inside a company, to make sure that gets to the top, but you also have all the information to organize in a way that makes sense. Because in terms of rating, it's really that popular really important stuff to the top that has.
Yeah, like where are the donuts this morning? Yeah, that's like really important, right? Right. Okay. Okay, so I think your question was, how are people going to find the most relevant information to them? Is that, or the most? So, okay. Okay, so it's sort of a blend between the categorization question and the weighting question. So basically, how do I solve everything? Awesome, okay. All right, this is how we're gonna solve everything. Well, okay, like honestly, how do you, like, it's always an iterative process, right? So we did this thing, and you sort of test it, and you see how people are using it, all right? So one of the first things that came up was that the Tappestry was like a really cool idea, but sort of a pain to use sometimes, like to find things. So we actually have a beta version right now where it brings up a filtering system where you click on the side and you can sort, you can filter events by category, which makes mini tapestries, or you can filter it by time. So there's a temporal sort of sorting as well. And I think the next thing is sort of the weighting. So what we've sort of done is we've almost envisioned like a slider system where you're putting in these inputs, and then you would get a new tapestry built on, say, how popular is it? When was it posted? So like, is it current? And is it in the category that I want to see? And then you would see a new visualization of just that content that's been filtered through. And then visually, hopefully, you're going to see that weighting system, when it's smarter, sort of tell you. Like there's only a magnitude of 4 right now, like 1 to 4. What I'd like to see is a magnitude of like 1 to 10. So there's a real discrepancy between what's dreck and like what's super important. Like when the CEO talks about something relevant to how we're going to maximize earnings and what your division's responsibility is going to be, or donuts, whatever's important to you, that's going to get a higher magnitude. So I think that's where we need to get to. And obviously the freeform search is going to be really key to this too, like letting you drill in, and to search and find things. Right. Yeah, okay, so you were asking like, what's going to go to the top? What the company thinks is important or what the employees?
Right, exactly. Once you get company that requires how are you going to tell them for their picture of this is our database, this is our information, this is the picture we want to do, which we want to see.
Well, okay. So is this going to be a function of organizational change? Maybe. Maybe it would give a picture to an organization of how people are moving through their day that would influence their constitution of how they do their business. I mean, I'm not a socialist, but it's social media, right? So the whole idea is that you don't want to be conforming a structure on top of a social network. What you want is a bottom-up, hopefully a bottom-up representation of what's actually occurring. So if we had companies that were coming back down saying, put this here, behave like this, do that, I think we were, different tool. Definitely a different tool. We would have missed the mark with this. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm trying to understand the kind of information that you would use this for. And the second part of that is, can you put graphics in it as well as text?
Great question. Okay, so what would you post in here? The things that I think are really valuable are the posts that contain real information, obviously, and I love the ones that have more metadata attached to it, like a link to something else that gives it context, or an image, or a document. I think that is really key to the relevance and the importance of the postings that are inside of it. And I think that's something we really need to work on with the composition of the threads. We need to help users begin to do that. It's sort of like, because if you think about it, you end up doing research on something. And it may be something that you just know. But it may also be something that you have a dependency on another piece of content for. So the value is like you've done the research, you've provided the link, you've provided the image, and I can get to it right away without having to go to the primary or secondary source for it. So I think the real valuable things are the rich posts that contain, sort of the additional content. But the other value may not be in the individual posts, but in the aggregation of the posts, right? So if you have people centering on a specific topic, it may be that my post could just be more opinion-based, but your post might be more fact-based because you're an expert. So hopefully if you're the expert, your rating is going to be much higher than mine. But when I look at it in the Tappestry, your groupings of posts as an archetype are going to be way more important than mine, but you will see that a lot of other people are commenting on it. So you could think about it like there's just one master brilliant post, or more importantly, there's a composition of posts that are coming together. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's the hope. And the graphic versus, you can do both. You can do it both ways, whatever you do. And Don, I'm sorry, we're out of time, but grab me on the side and I'll answer any questions. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.